Well, you've been working through the book of Matthew, and I've been watching a few of the videos online. It's been fun to accompany you and learning what it's like to live a life molded after Jesus, shaped by the cross, right? A cruciform life. Today, I've been tasked to take you a little step further in this journey. So let's dive into our text today, which is Matthew 26, verse 17, and then down through verse 35. So let's just jump right into it today. Matthew 26, 17. Now on the first day of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" Jesus said, "Go into the city and to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. Well, when it was evening, Jesus reclined at table with the 12, and as they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were very sorrowful and began to say to him one after another, "Is it I, Lord?" He answered, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who would betray him, answered, "Is it I, Rabbi?" He said to him, "You've said so." Now, as they were eating, Jesus took bread and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup. When he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Verse 30, and when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter answered him, "Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." All the disciples said the same. Interesting text. When I was a student at the Grand Rapids Baptist Seminary years ago, that's what it was named back then, I wrote a paper about the 2 church ordinances, baptism and the Lord's Supper. And it was a day when it's kind of in vogue to have a drama or something in addition to your sermon. The sermon, it was kind of one of the things that they were doing back then. And so I thought it'd be cool to look at these 2 celebrations from that viewpoint of a drama. So this is a familiar text to many of us. We hear it read frequently as we celebrate the Lord's Supper. But today I'd like to approach this text as a drama. So we'll look at the set. We'll look at the props. We'll look at the players. And then we'll look at the story. Okay? So let's start with the set. It's Passion Week. Jesus has been in Jerusalem during these days of preparation. He's coming in and out from Bethany. And for the week, preparing for the Passover, the week of unleavened bread. And on Wednesday, he returns to Bethany to spend the night. But now it's Thursday. It's Thursday probably in the morning. And the celebrations are going to begin. The Passover celebrations, the Feast of Unleavened Bread is going to start in the evening now. So you remember the Jewish days start in the evening. So from sundown to sundown, not midnight to midnight or morning to morning. It's sundown to sundown. So Thursday afternoon after sundown starts the next day. So But preparations needed to be made. There was a supper to be held. This is a commemorative memorial supper, and a lot of preparations need to be made and during this day of Thursday. So they need a venue, they need a lamb, they got to purchase a lamb, and it's got to be the right kind of lamb. They've got to roast this beast. They've got other foods that need to be gathered. Things need to be arranged, and thus the disciples' concern in verse 17, where are we going to celebrate the Passover? As always, Jesus is way ahead of them in his thinking. He had thought a great deal more about this night than the disciples realized. So he sends Peter and John into the city, according to Luke, and they meet a guy carrying a jar of water. They follow him to this house whose owner just happens to have a room furnished and available for them to use. And it's an upper room, okay? So venue, check, done. Now, we can picture Jesus and his 12 close friends gathering all this stuff together through the day and then clambering up the ladder or maybe walking up some stairs into this upper room, the second story room. Food is passed up, water is provided, bread is baking, wine, bowls, goblets are all set on this low table. And there's also a basin in the corner with a pitcher of water, but that's being ignored and for now. And so everybody's been bustling around and hustling all afternoon, and now it's sunset, and finally everything is calming down and everything is ready. Well, let's think about some of the other props that might have been there on this set that night. This is the Passover meal, or what they call the Seder meal, celebrated by Jews ever since the time of Moses to commemorate the Exodus, that their salvation from slavery in Egypt, that iconic salvific event of Jewish history. Now, there's some debate as to what is actually on the menu that night. But on the table, you probably would have found, according to my research, you probably would have found these things. A betza, which is a hard-boiled egg. Right? You put it on every plate, a hard-boiled egg. So the symbol, it's a symbol of suffering and oppression in Egypt. You see, everything else in boiling water disintegrates or becomes soft, right? But a hard-boiled egg becomes hard, tough. The longer you boil it, the tougher it becomes, right? Just like the Israelites under those 400 years of slavery, they actually became more populous and more formidable. So this is the symbol. There's bitter herbs, a reminder that they were servants to slavery, and life was bitter in Egypt. There's greens, parsley, celery, something like that, maybe some romaine, symbols of the coming spring, which this is springtime now in Jerusalem, and it brings hope. There's a bowl of salt water in which they dip things, the bitter herbs and so forth, to remind them of the tears that they cried in Egypt and of the salt sea through which they passed as they made their escape. There's this mixture called charoset that's a mixture of nuts and apples and cinnamon, perhaps wine, the color of mud, maybe with some texture of some straw. Okay, reminding them of the mortar that they used in Egypt to make these bricks, but it's sweet. Reminding them that even in the toughest situations, God's presence is sweet, even in the midst of slavery and hard labor. There's a bone, a roasted shank bone of a lamb laying there on the plate. And if you've ever been to a Seder meal, you'd see these things even yet today. So this bone, now there's also lamb being served, but the bone reminds us of the sacrificial lamb which took the place of their firstborn in that event in the Exodus. It served to remind them that there had to be something sacrificed, there had to be blood, there had to be something broken in order to save their lives. And down through the centuries then, you have lamb after lamb, goat after goat, bull after bull being sacrificed. So much blood. Day after day, week after week, festival after festival, year after year, the blood is running down the streets in Jerusalem. So much blood. Little did they know that night. They should have known, but I think they may have missed it. Little did they know that in their very midst that night was the ultimate Lamb of God that would take away the sins of the world. All of them. all of the sins, once for all. Little did they know that this lamb would be sacrificed that very day. So there was also matzo, this unleavened bread, maybe like a pita or pita bread, or maybe more like a cracker, reminding them of their hasty retreat from Egypt. No time to let the bread rise that day. And so then there was a sop. Each person dips a piece of bread into a certain mixture to symbolize dipping into the blood and putting it on the doorposts. This was probably what Judas dipped into with Jesus. There was wine. Luke tells us there are 2 cups, one before and one after the meal. Today there are 4 in this celebration that are ceremoniously drunk in the Seder. So these were probably some of the props on the stage. So you can imagine this stage, being set. And then let's talk about the players. There's 13 people. We get the impression that this is just Jesus and his 12 disciples. So probably a very intimate group, right? And they're there. And there's Peter, and there's John, and there's Judas. And they're all there. So let's talk about the story. So here we are. Everything's finally ready. Everyone's in their place, and they begin to enjoy this intimate, meaningful, commemorative artisan meal together where everything in the room has a purpose and a meaning behind it. But have you ever put work into one of these kinds of meals, one of these kinds of really artistic artisan meals where you've really worked hard to prepare this meal, and you set the table and you coordinate the timing and everything's just right and hot, and you get everybody in the room finally, and everybody's sitting down and you're ready to pray, and everything's just steaming hot. It's just perfect. And then something interrupts, right? Somebody gets up and something happens, and it's like, oh. So let's talk about this. This happens 3 times in this meal. Uncomfortable interruption number 1. So there they are. They're all sitting, and let's read over in John, if you go over there to John, because Matthew doesn't record this, but I think it's important to insert, because this is exactly when it happens. In John 13, this is what happens right at the beginning of the meal. Now, it says in John 13, verse 1, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, taking a towel tied around his waist, and he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Came to Simon Peter, who said to him, 'Lord, what are you doing? You going to wash my feet?' Jesus answered him, 'Well, you don't understand what I'm doing right now, but later you will.' Peter said to him, 'You're not going to wash my feet.' Jesus said, 'If I don't wash you, you have no part with me.' 'Oh, well then give me a bath.' Well, notice verse 2. It says, during supper. So after the meal had begun, Jesus gets up from his comfortable reclining position, takes off because they probably have like cushions and cloths, and they kind of recline when they lay down when they eat, right? So takes off his outer robe, goes over in the corner, grabs a towel, ties it around his waist, and begins to fill this basin with water. You can just imagine the other disciples. Now, this was something that somebody should have already done, and nobody already did it. So they're all laying there thinking, I think maybe I should have probably done that, but, I didn't do it. But, who am I to do it? But, we should have had, anyway, this didn't get organized. And so Jesus is over there doing it. He's pouring the water, and they're just starting to get a little flushed and embarrassed. And you can just hear the chatter diminish as the water fills the basin. And then he goes, and he starts one by one. They're laying down, just washing their dirty feet. Now he gets to Peter, and Peter says, no way, you know. But Jesus responds, says, I should be washing your feet. And Jesus' feet had already been washed. Jesus' feet had already been washed. A few days earlier, they had been anointed with fragrant oil by Mary, with expensive ointment in preparation for his death. Now he took the time to refresh the feet of these men who had walked with him faithfully for 3 long years, knowing that the journey ahead of them would be much longer than his journey. He wanted to refresh their feet. And at the same time, he showed them the importance of refreshing one another along the way, right? No more arguing or bantering for better position. No more arguing as to who would be on his right hand and so forth. This was going to be a rough road, a shared journey. They needed to learn to serve one another. And Peter and the others didn't get it at the moment, but later they would understand. And so we see Jesus moving deliberately one after another. It must have taken some time. There's 12 people there. That's 24 feet, right? Gently, lovingly. Even Judas' feet got washed. Yeah. So everything Jesus does is done deliberately with a purpose. So he explains in chapter 13, verse 14 of John, says, if then I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Their journey ahead would be long. They needed to stop the petty competition for honor and position. They needed to learn to refresh one another, to wash one another's feet, to serve rather than be served. And this is what they had been called. Show them how to serve. That was his purpose. He always has a purpose, Jesus does. I wonder, is this, it's a sideline, is this in our seminary curriculum? Where do we get this in school, right? Serving 101. And our not to knock theological education and everything, because that's part of what we do, right? But it does tend to promote individualism and perfectionism and competition often. But we need to learn somewhere along the line. Our pastors need to learn to serve. That if we're training people, we all need to learn to serve if we're going to serve Jesus in these ways. And so I remember when I got out of seminary, I was I had my Greek, got my Hebrew and all this stuff, and I got my MDiv, and I walk out. And the first thing I do is I do an internship with our church. And our first assignment was to teach. I'm like, oh yeah, who do I get to teach? 2- and 3-year-olds. And when we graduated from that, we got to teach 4- and 5-year-olds, which was really a trip. So this is something we need to learn along the way. We need to be servants. And I'm still learning that lesson. One of the hallmarks that we try to promote at Horizon is this concept of servanthood, that we really exist to serve our partners. And really, we talk to each other about having a kingdom mindset, not our kingdom, his kingdom, right? A broad concept of his kingdom. His will be done, not ours. Well, this is the attitude that Jesus puts on full display here. And it was worth the interruption. Okay, it was worth the interruption. Now let's move back to Matthew to see uncomfortable dinner interruption number 2. So Jesus is back, puts the basin back in the corner, he hangs up the towel, puts on his robe again, and returns to the table. And the conversation begins to lighten up a little bit, and things are going well, when suddenly he says, oh, by the way, one of you is going to betray me. I mean, imagine the reactions. Talk about throwing a wet blanket on the party, right? Okay, Jesus, you just took us down a notch with that foot washing scene. That was embarrassing. Okay, now what are you saying? And they're looking at each other. Have you ever had, that guy at the table that just says something that just like, the whole party goes down, And this is what's going on. So they're looking around saying, moi, right? Me? Is it me? Yeah. And Jesus tells them, it's the person with whom I'm going to dip in the dish, and somehow, I don't get it, but I've never understood this, why they missed that, how they missed that, but they did somehow. Then notice verse 24. It says, the Son of Man goes as it is written of him. This is going to happen. The crucifixion is fixed. It's the only way for a just God to be completely, once for all, forgive us of our sins and provide a way of reconciliation between God and man. It's got to happen. It's going to happen, okay? But he continues, he says, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would be better for that man if he had not been born. So in Reformed West Michigan, we can speak about God's providence, right? And just because God has foreordained things to happen in a certain way, that does not absolve us of our responsibility to obey, to act, to follow, right? It does not allow us to be irresponsible. Judas' decision, Jesus makes it clear, Judas' decision was on him. So John tells us that after this, Judas left, and the other disciples didn't really understand where he went or what he's doing, but Jesus knew. But again, Jesus' point is clear. Beware of the enemy among you. Beware of the enemy within. Well, the meal goes on. The conversation lightens up again just a little bit. And then as they near the end, it's time for the final cup of wine and the final bit of ceremony there in this commemorative meal. But there's one more uncomfortable interruption. Jesus grabs that final piece of matzo bread, and he blesses it, and then he cracks it, and he passes it out, and he says, now, eat this, you guys. This is my body. Now, that doesn't shock us, but it should. Okay, eat my body. Okay, this is my body. I want you to eat it. And then he grabs the final cup of wine, and he says, he blesses, and then he says, now drink this. This is my blood. This is my blood. So Jesus was reminding them that the covenant involved, and he's going to talk about a new covenant. This is the new covenant in my blood. But the old covenant, had always involved both brokenness and blood. Brokenness and blood. Death. When God originally cut a covenant with Abraham back in Genesis 15, there were animals that were cut in half. Okay? Bodies were broken. There was blood all over the place. Okay? This covenant, they at the time of the Exodus, when the covenant was celebrated, there was many other places in between, but just thinking about that scenario, they had to put blood. They had to kill a lamb and put blood on the doorposts in order to save the lives of their firstborn. So we see God revealing and expanding more and more of this covenant throughout the Old Testament. But this covenant, their salvation was always rooted in, always dependent upon blood. Someone had to die for this covenant to be active. But Hebrews 10:4 tells us that it's impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. The cup of wine that Jesus passed around represents a new covenant. We sang about it. And unlike the former one, the new covenant is not sealed with the blood of bulls and goats and sheep, but with the blood of a perfect person, the perfect Lamb of God, Jesus. And his sacrifice, poured out for many, would not result in temporary overlooking of sin, but in complete once-for-all forgiveness for all sin, all sins, all sinful nature. So Jesus had purpose once again in this interruption, this final interruption. And it was uncomfortable for them, but they're getting the point, right? And these two pieces of this artisan meal have significance. The blood, my body, the bread, the body will be broken, Jesus says. My body's going to be broken, and it's going to be soon. My blood is going to be spilt, and it would be that night. He says, I'm going to die, but these two elements are likewise life-giving. And you need to remember me this way, Because these also represent bread, also represents the bread of life, sustenance, right? And the fruit of the vine, that vibrancy, and these are elements of new life. Because I will also bring with this new covenant, new life, resurrected life. So don't miss the point. And so the story ends. They sing a closing hymn and head to one of Jesus' favorite spots up on the mountain. And as with any good drama, the curtain closes. And we're left in our seats. You've been there after the end of a good drama, or maybe a good movie. And you're thinking, right? And that's how Jesus leaves us. He leaves his disciples thinking. And he leaves us thinking. The ensuing hours would push these followers into corners where they would have to make tough choices. His predictions about the outcome would play out. All of them would fall away to some extent and leave him to walk the road alone. Like sheep without a shepherd, most would scatter and only a few would follow. From a distance, Peter would deny that he even knew him 3 times. And it seems that everything Jesus does leaves us with a choice. Isn't that true? We are not allowed to witness this person and remain neutral. Are we going to eat of his body? Are we going to partake in his blood? When we celebrate the drama of the Lord's Supper together, we're symbolically showing our willingness to be one with him, our willingness to, as Paul says, share his sufferings, become like him in his death. Thinking about the student that I talked to on a campus 3 weeks ago in an Asian context. And this student, I asked him, we were coming out of a chapel service together, and I asked his name, and then I said, so where are you from? And he told me, I said, oh, tough situation over there, isn't it? He says, yeah. So I knew where he had come from. I knew what had happened there. He says, yeah, they burned our home. Said they burned the homes of all the Christians in our neighborhood. They burned our church. They burned our church. He said, fortunately, my family and I, we got out. We got to a refugee camp, and then I came here. He's preparing to be a pastor in that context. Young man, about 19 years old. I think of my friend Bitrus in northern Nigeria. And I had breakfast with him, just getting to know one another, just he and I, one morning at a conference in Kenya last fall. And I said, I know things are tough up in your area. In northern Nigeria, a lot of persecution. And I said, what's it like? And this published theologian, astute Bible college president, seminary president, started to cry. And he said, I'm tired of visiting mass graves where people come in and destroy a whole village. Students who lose their loved ones on a frequent basis. Students who lose their lives on a frequent basis. It's the kind of thing. But he goes on. They go on in these contexts. Pastors tortured, other people around the world that are suffering for Jesus. This is normal. We talked to a friend from Nepal, and he says, suffering? Well, isn't that what Jesus told us that we were going to do? That we were going to go through? So Jesus leaves us with these choices. Now, chances are you're not facing religious persecution in your workplace. Perhaps you face some ridicule from your peers at school or extended family because of your faith in Christ, but your life is not in danger, not now. But in this environment, it's easy for us to do the communion thing without deep reflection. But it's really a gruesome picture. It's no wonder early Christians were considered cannibals But it was gruesome for Jesus. He suffered severely to pay for our sins, death, even the most humiliating death on the cross. But just as bread renews sustenance and strength, and the fruit of the vine brings life and vitality, Jesus did not stay dead, right? On the third day, this dead man walked out of the grave, a physically renewed person. And that's the kind of guy I want to follow. You can do that? I'm in. Are you? We cannot face Jesus. We cannot look at Jesus. We look at the person of Jesus without making a choice. It forces us. It forces us to decide. So like the disciples that night, this drama, this person of Jesus leaves us with a choice. Are we going to follow him closely? Are we going to sheepishly look at him from afar, unsure of our commitment? Are you all in? Are you ready to serve, ready to take responsibility, ready to suffer whatever comes your way? This is cruciformity.